Hey everyone, this episode ran long, so I split it up into two parts. So this is part one. So if you're listening to this first, then you did it correctly. Hooray. If you're listening to this second, what the hell are you doing, man? So you're looking around in this mansion, and you see on one of the walls a big strange zipper, and it's open. And sticking out of that zipper is our co-host Chris.
Hey, what's up?
So you go through the zipper, and on the other side is, you're just outside the mansion. That's weird. How did that happen? On the mansion, on the back porch, there's a man who has just punched a stone, and that stone turned into a turtle. And the man who punched that stone is our guest host today, John.
Oh, that's me.
And I'm, what am I doing? I am rewinding time to figure out how I'm going to edit this into something coherent for the intro of the show. And the guy who's rewinding that is me, Ryan. I'm the other host.
Say hello, Ryan.
Welcome to Neighbor Science, everyone. Today we're going to be talking about an essay that I wrote, which is kind of a summary of all of the kind of class analysis things that I've read and thought about for the past few years. And John gave me some really good feedback on the writing. I'm trying to submit it to the new, completely legitimate, dead serious news organization, which is known as gettingyourdicksucked.com. And if anyone else has any serious content to submit to that, you should look them up on Twitter or go to gettingyourdicksucked.com and send it over to them. So let's get started on this. So John suggested I just read the intro paragraph, and then Chris suggested we go through the rest bullet by bullet. So yeah, I'll go ahead and start. For many people today, the fact of a reality TV character clowning his way to the most prominent position of power on Earth has revealed the ugly reality underneath our former beliefs. We live in the same class society that has existed for 10,000 years. Our statesmen have not devised a selection system for the most qualified, smartest people to rise up and guide us toward our ever slightly improving futures. Meritocracy is a soothing lie. The people at the top are actually only there because their fathers gave them a small loan of $1 million, while the rest of us spend our lives breaking our bodies or getting screamed at or filling in spreadsheets because our fathers will never have $1 million in their lives. So the first thing that I bring up in here is research by Blair Fix, who we've had on the show before to talk about his research, which reveals that the biggest factor in explaining personal income distribution is the distance that you are from the top of a organization's hierarchy. So if you're the CEO, you're going to have more higher income than someone who is lower than you, which seems like common sense, but no theory of personal income distribution ever accounts for that.
Okay.
I mean, it's true, and it sort of undercuts another theory, I think, of capitalism, where supposedly you wouldn't have to be at the top of one of these companies in order to receive the income from that item. You could just have a really great idea. You could come up with a really great song. You could have a really great book. But then again, that still belies the fact that even with the greatest ideas, which could possibly rocket society forward, be it a business patent or an invention, it really doesn't mean anything unless it's coupled together with the power that comes from having a hierarchy that's probably controlling some means of production in some way.
And we haven't really talked about this on the show yet, but even a lot of the musicians now that are really rich are the ones like Jay-Z and Kanye who create companies that they are and they're at the top of the hierarchy of them. So they
Oh, no,
create
Right.
Rockaware or whatever, and
Yeah, I mean, music is an excellent way of starting to see uh, where this idea of like, I I don't know how much you guys are familiar with copyright law, but it's an insanely like backward system.
yeah, I'm pretty familiar. I had to take a few intellectual property law classes for my computer science degree.
Yeah, and it gets insanely dumber and dumber the more you apply it just to the cultural aspects that you're handling, especially when it comes to movies. You look at a lot of copyright as it applies to these like softer cultural things, and basically, I believe there's like a date that's holding firm somewhere within like the 20s or 30s that applies specifically to Disney movies,
Yeah,
like
it's Mickey Mouse. Mickey Mouse.
Mickey Mouse and Steamboat Willie.
Yep.
And they've just been holding on to that and extending it. I think the last one was like the Sonny Bono copyright extension in like the 70s. And I might be just be talking out of both sides of my mouth because I don't have that information directly on me. I mean, but basically, a bunch of lawyers get together, they go to Congress, they're like, yo, this isn't long enough to support these artists or anything. But really, it's not artists holding on to these. Basically,
Right.
as a musical artist, if we're going to like go back to like talking about like Jay-Z and Kanye West, is like you write a song, you do the copyright, but basically you don't really own the copyright. As a recording artist, basically what happens is you like sign a publishing deal, and if you're the one like writing the songs, then maybe you get a little bit of revenue from that copyright. But say you're doing a performance and you're selling that performance to a label, and then the label sells your music. Basically what happens is they give you a huge fucking advance with which you're supposed to record your album with. And then after you record that album, whatever money is left over doesn't really matter. What basically happens is, as the company is now selling that product on the other side, they're like, oh man, it turns out you haven't paid back all of that advance yet, all the money that we put into producing it. There are huge amounts of like hidden fees put into it. Something even like called a breakage fee, which refers back to when they would transport the actual vinyl records in mass loads in like the trucks, because shit's flimsy. One or two will break per thing. So like, all right,
They
break.
charge the artist for that? That's
Huh?
crazy.
Yeah, they
charge the
actually
artist
charge
for that.
fees. And the worst part
Wow.
is they're still charging the breakage fee as you're recording digital music. So why is that shit even still in there? I mean, the
Right.
accounting, like Ty goes to runner.
Sometimes there's dropped packets when you're streaming in TCP.
Yeah,
Right.
they're not listening to the
Shattered
whole
all over
song.
my kitchen floor.
Yes, I mean, so shit gets ridiculous as record labels try to account for, hey, have you paid back all of your advance yet? And that's just the way it used to work in like 2000s up through like maybe early 2010s. I'm not as hip to the scheme anymore as what like current recording labels will do, but basically it got screwed up so much, but that the reason why you're seeing like the influx of like SoundCloud artists is a mixture of one, labels like will wait for other bands to like blow up or something. They'll wait for your musical act to blow up, then they'll come in, then they'll try to sign you to a deal once you've already proven that you can sell. Like
Yeah.
they're not
Yep.
even trying to take a chance on developing people. Like A&R has or
It's the startup model applied to music now. Where
Yeah.
Exactly.
if you're
Exactly.
a Silicon Valley like entrepreneur, your goal is to grow big enough and get noticed by one of the big companies who will just acquire you.
Yeah, it's basically what's happening to Silicon Valley startups, where Google or Facebook will buy your app and just roll it into their shit. That's what's been happening within the music industry as like you've gotten to things like MySpace and everything. It's why like
And it's
like,
the same thing with pop music. My cousin is he's in a country band and he's a pop song writer, and he tells me all the time that like pop writers will try to write a song for like a specific artist. Like they'll try to write like a Rihanna song or a Ed Sheeran song. And they can
there are definitely
they can choose to take it and perform it or not.
yeah, I mean
Like even Ed Sheeran does that. Like that one song, the whatever your body one. I don't pay attention.
I'm
to
in love
pop
with the
music that
shape
much.
of you. Like that one?
Yeah. He wrote that for. I think he wrote that for Rihanna actually.
Oh, wow.
But then she didn't want it, so he decided to perform it himself.
Yeah, and that works out better because like he's not gonna make money probably, and it's weird to describe it like this, but you have to decouple the thought of selling the recording, but then also like the content of the recording. So he's making money from the content of the actual recording, but maybe not the recording itself. I don't know. I'd have to see Ed Sheeran's like deals, and that shit's like way off the records, being probably torn apart by teams of corporate lawyers who are going head to head to make sure that either Ed Sheeran can recoup some of the money from the actual recording and that he'll never recoup any money from the actual recording because that's just how record labels work. And that whole thing about squeezing surplus labor from people, like that shit would probably be most visible to recording artists. But of course, good luck trying to get any of them to unionize or anything in any meaningful way.
Right.
So, totally random. I can't believe this is the first time this has ever happened, but I just splashed sake in my eye. It fucking hurts really bad.
Amazing.
Oh, God.
That's what it feels like when your labor gets exploited. Just burns.
Yeah.
Speaking of like distributive, let's see, like acquiring, popular artists or whatever, and rights to their essentially to their revenue, and all that they do in music. This was so Ryan, you and I were talking about doing a bit on the publishing industry with Coffee with Comrades folks for a few weeks, but we never have quite gotten them like scheduled for us. But like, so in a nutshell, what we can maybe flesh out with them if we still want to do that. But in a nutshell, with writers, say, because I write novels, hey everybody, I write novels. Pay me money. But anyway, what we have to fucking deal with is that it's almost even worse because we have to prove to these extremely like fuddy-duddy capitalist publishing houses that we're worth gambling on, and then similar kinds of like clawbacks occur where they're like, oh yeah, so we try to make money on your shit, but also we put out all these physical copies that didn't sell, so we're just going to keep all this money, and your royalties are going to be like a dime a month, things like that. And I think that as self-publishing has sort of swelled up as a kind of an alternative mode of production, basically, and market too, which has potential for things like dual power, but also is actively being co-opted by places like Amazon because we haven't come up with a fucking
50% of e-commerce is on Amazon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like we have to come up with some nice communist publishing houses, folks. But they're out there.
It's a shame because like obviously along these lines, like the big thing about going to Amazon and publishing through Amazon is like everyone is already there, and a lot of the places where people already are, those are obviously all capitalist spaces. If there ever was to be like that fully digital dual power situation where people are already there and you could give your money to obviously something that isn't going to recreate these systems of exploitation further down their line in their physical spaces, it would be like, well, where's communist Twitter at? I guess it's like Mastodon, but oh man, that actually got me thinking, like, does it be neat?
Platforms are hard because they're only useful if there's a lot of people on there. And
exactly.
The way you get a lot of people on there is, it's like kind of a catch-22 or whatever.
Yeah, if we had the power, we wouldn't need to get the power in the first place. Is basically
right.
What we need to do is get Bernie Sanders elected, and then he'll pass a law forcing everyone to move to Mastodon. We are sick and tired of 280 characters.
Every American deserves at least 420 characters.
I feel like that would actually be a platform if you look at it for like especially the pissed off conservatives who are like they're getting kicked off of Twitter. Every red-blooded American really deserves at least 2,000 followers. There are currently within Twitter the top 1% of 1% are getting all the likes and retweets.
Americans are sick and tired of being shadow banned.
And then Killer Mike just like raps for everybody for like a few minutes. Yeah.
I haven't heard much from Killer Mike lately. I thought he was Bernie's guy. Like, what happened there?
I think he has other shit to do. I mean,
yeah.
Bernie might
make that cool show.
Bernie might be outsourcing because I saw a Bernie rapper, somebody who's like probably trying. Huh?
Was it Soul?
I don't remember the guy's name. I know I have the post somewhere. It's like I've never heard this guy except for when he was like, "Yeah, I'm doing this Bernie rap," and he's of course getting the Bernie train retweets all along from Twitter. But it's you listen to it and you're like, this doesn't hit, and why do I hate this? Even though it's like everything that you could agree with, like, oh man, it's hip hop, it's Bernie. Person of color checks all the boxes, and then you listen to this, it's like, no, this is absolute dog shit. Oh my god, what?
I think it's hard to make a rap about Bernie Sanders that isn't like corny in some way,
It's hard to rap about anything which isn't like a sort of survival within the neoliberal hell world. Like if you go slightly off that tangent and it doesn't hit, like there's definitely like a within the pressure cooker of the world we live in, like there definitely are diamonds out there in the rough that are produced. You listen to it and you're like, damn, that fucking slaps. And you listen to this guy and it's like, he needs to go back in the pressure cooker for a little bit longer. This dish is not done.
Right.
Yeah, I've been listening to a lot of Sauce Walka and Maxo Cream the last couple of months, and like they have some really like class conscious songs, but then also like they don't have like a coherent theory of like what we should do about that, So it's just kind of like, there's a bunch of people on the bottom, and it's mostly my people, and we're always going in and out of jail, and we're always broke as shit, and we get fucked with constantly. But also, the main thing I care about is like, don't get fake diamonds, and be grateful for me for like getting you money. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, that's the part I miss is like there are definitely people like Dead Prez who are definitely on the social tip. That's a group. I mean, it's not a new group or anything, but I went back and recently listened to Dead Wolves, and that definitely at some parts you're like, holy shit, this is something. And also even just like older stuff that isn't even like class conscious, but like even sometimes like if you listen to somebody like Big L, I'm not sure if you two are familiar, but he's rapper from Harlem, and basically he's rapping in the early 90s, and even in his bars, like he was really ahead of the curve on critiquing Giuliani. I don't think there's any other rapper who has a recording of them saying that they have plans to get Giuliani hung, and
nice.
That kicks ass.
So I mean, like, he wasn't always like that cool, and there are definitely like things baked in along with that where you're just like, I don't think I can agree with that anymore. But there's definitely like a very, very like lumpen proletariat like character to it, to where if the conditions were there, or if there was a movement beside him, like he definitely probably would have been the ones. Like definitely, he's a tip of the spear guy. But after the pruning of the 1960s and 1970s of a lot of these leftist movements, a lot of them are just like they're raisins in the sun. They never had the chance to really develop with that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it was T from Champagne Sharks who was saying that, like, what we've been trying to do in the last, like, couple decades is have, like, art lead, like, in the, in the revolution or whatever, when it should be, like, the revolution goes first, and then we develop art like alongside of it.
Yeah,
So we're kind of put in the cart before the horse or whatever.
And there's also, have you guys read any of like No Shortcuts about labor organizing recently?
Not yet. I've read sort of like the Cliff Notes in an article recently, but I think actually you and I were exchanging some thoughts on it right like a few weeks ago. But go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I've read the first sort of opening chapters where it starts describing things, and I have heard like a lot like in the 1960s, like the civil rights era, there was this sort of shifting from working class movements to more like student led activities.
Yeah.
And that might have been to like maybe the detriment of these movements because like I mean, it's great to see young people involved. I would never stop students from getting out there, but I mean, without working class people, without the power of strikes,
Students are mostly white bougie people, especially before the last couple, like before like the 90s.
But not even who they are, but like the power they affect. Like it's one thing to march out in the street, to make a demonstration, to have this spectacle before you. Like I'm mad, I'm not going to take it anymore. But it's like, all right, what the fuck are you going to do? Not turn in your fucking
like
math
students
homework?
don't have a lever of power that they can control, really.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
But if you like say the garbage men go on strike, that shit's just piling up in the streets. Like a city will grind to the fucking halt if it's not handling its sanitation. That's very necessary to a city. If people aren't running the power plants, like where are these key sectors of the economy being organized? Like these are the areas you could be organizing under, but I mean, there's no sort of power analysis there.
Those kind of jobs are the ones that are probably most affected by like contracting, right? Is like really important, like infrastructure type jobs.
Definitely, and probably
yeah. I mean, it depends on if they've kept themselves unionized or not. Usually, like some of the.
I guess it's probably regional too.
Yeah, I was going to say, DC has a pretty solid. I think they have a bunch of unions in things like the transit industry and shit like that. So those people get a decent fucking salary, as I recall. I might be wrong.
Something I really noticed when I was up. When I was up in Cape Cod not Cape Cod really, but in southwest Massachusetts, where my relatives actually live, there is a ton of union buildings there, and I don't think I have ever seen a single union building in Virginia. And I've lived here for
Virginia
25
has some
years.
of the worst labor laws. It's a very much a right to work state. It
is. There's a right to work building that's on the way to work for me. It's right off of. Oh, it's not on the way to work for me, but it's right off of 495, like at the intersection of 495 and Braddock Road. There's the right to work building there.
So let's on that note. I mean, it's important to remember that. Let's see. So New England, much of New England, so like Maine and the more rural parts were a lot of the earlier kind of industrial areas. There's like I think a lot of like logging and like fabrication and shit like that. And I think obviously shipping, and fishing and things like that. And so the
distilling. Yes. Exactly. So all these industrial labors and things that you can pretty easily trace to like the 19th and 20th century industrial labor movement and unionization and everything like that. They got the jump on that partly because of that, and partly probably because they had some higher density of like white working class. I wouldn't be surprised. And so I was actually listening to Matt Chrisman inebriated past episode today where he was talking about how the two-party system, like the modern iteration of the two-party system is like in fundamental opposition to the checks and balances of the Constitution or whatever. And one of the things he was talking about was how the North and South split up basically like because of like geographic conditions like soil fertility and stuff like that, where it just happened to be that the North is more conducive to industrial stuff and the South is more conducive to agriculture. And a lot of the differences in ideology like come down to like a legacy of slavery and the Civil War and all that stuff, and like like even being like drinking or not, like people that were for prohibition tended to be like Southerners who didn't drink quite as much as the Northerners who were distilling since the 1400s or the 1500s or whatever. So
right, they're just not down.
I recommend that episode a lot. It was very good.
Yeah, definitely.
It was actually like a pretty good analysis. Something I wish that was like greater considered, the way it talked about how the regional considerations and how each state differed was the original consideration when creating this. And basically, it all starts to coming unglued in like the 20th century. By the time you start having these parties, which now start dating back to the Civil War, and they're no longer like, you don't have like the Federalists falling way to like the Whigs or anything.
Yeah. His whole thesis was like the checks and balances thing depended on not having parties that were ideologically coherent. And now, in the 2000s, we have parties that are ideologically coherent. And Mitch McConnell is leading the charge to make the checks and balances totally useless by just being obstructionist when they're out of power and doing whatever they want when they're in power.
Yeah. It's at this point it is essentially lockstep power for its own sake, etc. And I think that's a good way of putting it. Is that like the ideological aspect of the checks and balances or partisanship or whatever. Sorry, go ahead. Okay.
Yeah.
Anyway, so we're getting a little off track. So let's move on to the
next
point.
Extremely on track.
Yeah. So I next bring up the work by David Graeber, the latest by him about bullshit jobs. And how there's all these jobs that people that are working them think are useless, and he kind of connects it to like inadvertently to Blair Fix's research, which is that like the more of these make work jobs there are, the more easily a manager can justify a higher rate of pay because they have all these people working under them.
Right.
Yeah, the mid to high level like management positions, which do require serious credentials, which require you to know a lot about the field. But in the end, like, what are you really doing from day to day? If you're a corporate lawyer, how does that really contribute to anything going on in society that's really necessary?
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Oh yeah. A lot of just to build on like make work especially at the like kind of professional, quote unquote, professional career level, and the mid to upper management, everything like that. So much of the kind of highly specialized or highly qualified or otherwise elite and credentialed, right? Work positions, professional positions in this hierarchy exist almost solely on their ability to build, negotiate, maintain, or destroy or displace the intrigues that they all stir up in order to keep class in place, right, and keep themselves in those classes. So it's essentially social processes masked as productive processes, which is, I mean, that's a bit Marxian, but like, to me that makes sense. It's, lawyers coming up with arguments against other lawyers who are coming up with arguments against various bureaucrats, and the bureaucrats exist in order to, it's very like, you can bring it into a critique of state and or capitalism, because it's all just
I would almost say it's more Kafkaesque than Marxian.
Oh, certainly. Yeah. Well, I think like it can be both.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, when
it's
you
kind of like a Byzantine, like pointless bureaucracy that's just like fighting itself over
exists for itself,
the right to exist and
for and against itself.
Yep.
Yeah, it certainly does become Kafkaesque when you follow it to like the conclusions of today's world. Where you have literal companies just that profit, like $700 or $800 per person that's being held in captivity at the border.
Yep. Yep. Yep.
So, do you guys think that your jobs are useful or pointless?
I would say 100% pointless.
Yeah, I would say like anything that I have done that isn't in direct, like really direct service of like production and design and things like that. Where, because I've been like a technical editor where I was helping documents conform to styles and standards and specifications so that an engineer wouldn't misinterpret what they were reading, right? And also to streamline blah, blah, blah. And to make it look pretty, and aesthetics do count to some extent in these things too. But so that was important because you don't want like these 787s falling out of the sky, or at least you don't want it to be your fault when they actually do. And fuck you, Boeing. And then there's like shit that I have done where, like I've been a fucking barback, and I am again, actually, by the way. And you're like, yeah, of course, I'm running shit for some other workers to work, like do physical work to get a product into somebody's hands where it's warm and tasty, and they're going to give you money for it. That's not pointless because it's just service work or production work.
Yeah.
But a lot of the other jobs that I've had is like admin contractor or ops contractor, data entry. Once I was in a fucking contract where the VP at this place, one of the like 12 fucking VPs, just a stable of uselessness.
Real Office Space hours.
Oh yeah, real Office Space hours. And he told his EA, who was, by the way, an extremely overqualified person, he was like, so-and-so, I want you to update all of my contacts in Outlook. And she looked, and he had like a few thousand contacts in Outlook. And so she's like, I'm going to get a temp. and that temp was me. So I show up, and she's like, hi, so here's the situation. And I was like, okay. And I'm like, that sounds like hell. So she's like, you're just going to have to basically do your best. And obviously, like, I'm running interference between you and him if anything goes wrong, so I can kind of cover your ass a bit. But like, you need to update 3,000 or 4,000 contacts for this guy in the space of like a month. And I was like,
yikes.
Okay, yikes. And I was like, where is the data? And she's like, it's just probably out there on the internet. And I was like, oh, fuck. So I basically I just wound it down to like this extremely fast data entry situation where I was like, Google, like copy paste name into Google, bam, 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 top 10 hits, top 3 hits, something. If it looked legit, I would then click, take a few looks. Is this person still at this company? If not, update it real quick, as quickly as possible. I found a few people who were deceased, that kind of thing, and a few people who, of course, had extremely common names, like fucking, Gary Johnson or something, and you're like, God damn it, so you're just going
Gary Johnson,
right, and then of course, a lot of these contacts were people at like hedge funds and stuff, and hedge funds are one of those types of places that are notoriously private, secretive, et cetera, because of course they're all just handing each other money and escorts and shit, and so you can't find their fucking contact information.
Escorts, huh?
Well, you know what these people are like. And so,
I guess it depends on how
useless.
far your gaze is, because like in that situation, clearly it's like pointless. It's like, yeah, you could do this shit yourself, like fuck off. But for my job, it's like, well, I'm programming stuff, and the thing doesn't get made unless I program it. But in terms of what I'm actually doing, it's like, okay, so it's a survey system for like private schools to enter data about like tuition and salaries and stuff, so that they can figure out how much to charge and how much to pay their employees. So, according to my ideology, it's useless. So I don't know if I categorize that under useful or useless, because obviously, like, if I were to do something that has a better purpose, then my job wouldn't be useless. So I don't know.
Yeah, I think
Go ahead.
I was gonna say I think I've run the bill because there are times where it seems like the more sort of useless and superficial it is, the better it's done. I know when I was first looking for work and I was really hard up, I worked as a janitor for an assisted living facility. So for basically people who are so old that
Oh, that sounds rough.
yeah, they require 24/7 things. And this place was like notoriously understaffed. Basically, I was one of two people for a huge wing. I'm probably cleaning like 30 or 40 rooms in an 8-hour shift. And it's like that is probably, I mean, you need someone to clean up these rooms because they also had a ward for people in dementia. So, I mean, some of them, I mean, I wouldn't say, I don't even know how to put it, but like you're just literally finding like feces like underneath the beds and stuff. Like you can't just leave that. That's probably the most necessary job is getting that disposed of. And
getting the shit off of old people.
Yeah, getting shit off of old people, cleaning up the rooms, making sure that a lot of the surfaces are wiped down. Because, I mean, talking about people with weakened immune systems at the end of their life, if you leave, like, too much dust or anything, like, that's, like, very necessary. And it also was only...
On the other hand, we could kill everyone when they turn 30, like Logan's Run.
Oh, yeah.
Which I'm pretty sure was a movie about how that was a good idea to do that.
Yeah, basically. Yeah.
And certainly, as I come up to my 30th birthday, I'm actually just hoping that becomes a policy at some point because this is for the.
I would have been dead 4 months ago.
I was gonna say I owed people some years back, I guess.
But like one of the more recent jobs I had was I ran I was a technician for a radio station, so I maintained their antenna, so like they could broadcast out the cars and everything. And it was very, very interesting because radio is very much like a dying thing, even though it works so well. It's
right,
and it'll never like stop being like a solid technological thing. You can just listen to shit on your iPhone. I mean, of course, we're doing a podcast. This will never be. Well, it might be on terrestrial radio. I don't know. Like maybe one day.
That'd be awesome.
When I was doing it, you know, all I had to do was make sure, like, does it work? Yeah, it does. And there's certain parts of the system that maybe I had to do a little bit more work on. I had to come up with some creative solutions sometimes to make sure that it was still going out in the air. At one point, the entire studio flooded out, and they needed me to replace it. But there's like the question of like, you know, if I don't do my job today, is anyone going to die? And it was like, no one will ever miss me if I just disappeared off the face of the earth. Like the people driving in cars, no, they'll still keep listening to Spotify on their iPhones. Like they won't miss me, the technician at the thing. Surely
I've really thought for a long time that should be the logic for organizing, you know, the social division of labor is like, okay, what jobs do we need to do? We need to do the ones that will prevent people from dying. And then if we have anyone left over to work, we'll do the things that are maybe a little bit less necessary than that. And if we have anyone left over, we can do like the useless shit. And if you guys get tired of doing that, here's an idea: make robots that will do those jobs for you, and then you won't have to do them anymore.
I mean, but we also have like systems so centralized and everything that like,
yeah.
I mean, fuck, like, do we really like? I mean, and that's at the heart of Bullshit Jobs by Graeber, is like, you know, a lot of us aren't needed, and we could probably give back to all the other things, like all the social connections that we've just been decimated by our new like social organizations. But the fact that how many hours do we have to spend at work? How many days do we have to spend at work? How much vacation time do you get? When's the last time you've seen your family? Like I have to move constantly to keep finding work as it inevitably drives up. And I'm just sweeping along. And right now, it's like, you know, my mother's taking care of my grandfather, and it's something only afforded to her because she's retired. And I'm watching, you know, the man who essentially like raised me from when I was like very small to just about when I was ready to go off to college. Like I'm just I'm calling my mom every week, and I just get updates on like how he's slowly passing away, and I can't be there for him the same way he was there for me.
Yeah, yeah, and that's also like kind of because of the state organizing society. Like,
Yeah, I mean,
long ago we wouldn't have abandoned. Well, I guess they probably abandoned old people sometimes, but they wouldn't have like thrown them into the hands of some other person that was like forced to take care of them all the time. It would be more like they stay with you until it's their time or whatever, and you take care of them because you have a bunch of extra time that you're not spending, doing a 40+ hour a week job.
Yeah, I mean, it's necessary. Like literally, without assistance, like the same way that other families will send, their older family members to assisted living facilities. I mean, without my mother being there, grandfather would probably die. I mean, he's very close at this point, and I mean, this is just these are the opportunities afforded to me based off of, I guess, as we were saying earlier, your position to the hierarchy within whatever firm you work for. It just determines what sort of life I get. It's basically like a caste system. As much as we like to think that, or the liberal assumption is that economics and politics are separated. I mean, these economic organizations are as any much political organizations as the actual political ones that you get to pretend that you're voting with. And just based off of how politically, or in this case, economically important you are, that's the quality of your life now.
So that's actually a perfect segue into the next point, which is I go into these studies of rare surnames. So there's this guy, Gregory Clark.
Gregory
Clark. So he's an economist who started to study probate records, which are they're like court records that happen, I think, like at the time of death to find out like what your estate is, essentially. I think that's what it is. I never looked it up, but that's what I understand from context. So he like looked through these probate records and looked for people with unusual surnames. Because what he wanted to do was study intergenerational wealth and finding out like what the connection is between families is not an easy task. If you don't have like full genealogy records or whatever for like each person. So if you study rare surnames, then those tend to be passed on because of the like patronymic system that we have. So anyway, he looked at records over like hundreds of years, and he's done it in like with the assistance of people in other countries, in a bunch of different countries, and that includes like Japan through like from before the Meiji Restoration, and China before the Communist Revolution. And so what he finds in these studies is like social classes are very persistent, and they do like often persist through these major upheavals. In the case of the Meiji Restoration, during the Edo period, the two top classes of society were the daimyo, the lords, and the samurai, the warrior class. And during the Meiji Restoration, they were merged into a new aristocracy called the kazoku, which Chris says here means family. And they also brought in like some other families from like the middle class to the upper class based on like service to their country or whatever. And so
status thing.
Yeah. So there was some class advancement for some people, but these daimyo and samurai families stayed in the upper class through the Meiji Restoration. And then likewise in the Chinese Communist Revolution, they did achieve some measure of equality, but there were still some persistent families in the upper class, even though they targeted like the capitalist elite or whatever. And I think his hypothesis about it was like the focus on like exploitation and land ownership, and not families who form essentially like coalitions to keep themselves in the upper class was why these families stayed in like the new upper class that was formed after the revolution.
Oh, that's depressing as fuck.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the study of England looked over like 1,100 years or something like that, or it was like from the year 1100 or something like that.
Yeah.
And yeah, very persistent social classes. It's crazy.
Yeah. I think
Okay,
really.
Go ahead.
I was just to say, I think really the only times when, let's say the families within these structures are actually effectively displaced is when they are, annihilated or exiled, which I think is honestly like points to people who are in favor of like the kind of bloody purge, violent revolution style of approach. I get it, and it is a big
I
strong
checked
argument,
France.
right?
I didn't check France.
Yeah, well, I mean, even in France, there were a lot of like petit bouge and nobles and stuff who became part of the revolutionary government as revolutionaries and radicals, and then some of them stayed that way, and some of them turned back to a kind of a more quote unquote moderate liberal or whatever kind of stance, and some I think even went back to kind of conservative something or other after everything had died down and they could take off their cockades and shit, or keep them on and pretend that we're all on the same team. Which explains actually a lot of the popularity of like Napoleon and everything since then. But I digress.
Yeah, because I think Napoleon was one of the first times where you start getting to maybe the illusions of meritocracy, where you could prove your worth,
right,
within the context of the Napoleonic Wars. If you make things happen,
exactly,
boom. It doesn't matter what family you're from anymore. It's like, no, we need you, your intelligence, and what your worth is. And there's certainly, that's the illusion we like to paint in the United States as well, is that if you work hard and if you prove yourself, if you have the right credentials, if you go to college, if you get this degree, no, your path to success is, that straight line. Of course, it doesn't necessarily seem to work out for a lot, and there are a lot of people now disillusioned with that, especially when you look at like what the public opinion of the American dream is, what social mobility is starting to look like in the successive generations, and even across these racial demographics. I think black men is the easiest for downward social mobility.
Yeah.
They have the hardest time, black men, retaining wealth along generations compared to most others.
Yeah, there was that thing by, I hate citing him, but Matt Brunig and Ryan Cooper about how the mortgage crisis response in 2009 by Obama was like the biggest destruction of black wealth in like decades.
Yeah, you also had a lot of private equity firms just cleaning up at that point, where a lot of the mortgages where they couldn't be upheld, people are forced out into their homes. These houses are now taken by private equity firms, and they're turned into like single family rentals, especially across the Midwest, where I think home ownership goes from like 83% to like 72%, and a lot of families who are flying by the seat of their pants on these mortgages are now having to rent out the house that they assumably had legal ownership over. And of course, it only gets worse as like the private equity firm steps in, because they're not even a real landlord at this point. They're not flesh and blood, not there. They're not coming over to fix the problems with the house. You can't assumably work on your house anymore the way you could when you owned it. So
and even if you could, you'd just be spending money on something that you don't own.
Yeah,
exactly.
It's one of those
Capital
moments.
improvements.
I almost wonder if, like, because I know that, like, the neoliberal movement was started by, like, some, I don't know, like, how accurate this is, but, like, there's a narrative that the neoliberal movement was started by, like, a memo by some business owner saying that essentially, like, business owners need to get more involved in politics and get things to be more favorable to business. And I was thinking, like, just now, like, I wonder if, like, it could almost be characterized as a revanchist movement, where the people that are actually ideologically behind it have this revanchist belief system, and the people that we attribute to actually carrying out a lot of the things that, like, the government has done to make this whole thing happen, we're just sort of like vessels for ideology, and just sort of like, you know, stupid, brainless managers who just made all that stuff happen because there were these business leaders kind of like whispering in their ear and giving them funding for their political campaigns.
Well, I mean, that's a very existential question. I mean,
Right.
what are any of us, if not like vessels for ideology, sort of just responding to the conditions surrounding us?
Right. Right.
True,
Well,
but
I
some
mean,
of
you
us
know,
at least have ideology, whereas the like the neoliberal politicians, a lot of them just are just dullards.
Yeah, they're just holding water for a
Yeah.
lot of it.
yeah.
I mean, because when you look at it, and when we first talked about how a lot of the revolutions fell short, I know, like, one of the favorite points was like the Paris Revolution, and you know, coming to me, like, I have a hard time reading through theory and parsing through a lot of the history, because this has sort of been self-study on my own. But the more I've learned about the Paris Revolution, the sort of less revolutionary, like, it's become to me, because it sort of was always this petite bourgeois revolution, where it's just, oh, this wasn't actually, like, you know, maybe it didn't really carry with it the possibility for communism. It was just all the liberals getting together, and they were just like, finally, like, no, I'm tired of this feudal bullshit. Let's do this liberal bullshit now. And of course,
It's easy to get lost in the optics of the upper class being murdered, you know.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that especially happens a lot in like, when you talk about the American Revolution, just for, like, you know, what I think the public perception of the American Revolution is it really a revolution if it's just replacing one oppressive class with another oppressive class? What was that one quote from the A People's History, like, tyranny is tyranny, let it come from where it may.
Yeah. One of the first things, one of the earliest things that it sort of put a crack in my view of the American Revolution in particular. I was already like, government. I was always skeptical of that shit. I mean, I grew up in a fucking dictatorship, so you get really skeptical really fast, even as like a 5-year-old. But like, you know, you're like, yeah, like, of course you can't fucking believe their lies. But when you talk about like history and like idealism and visions and shit, you know, the narrative that they sell you. But anyway, one of the first cracks that developed in my view of that, my very positive view of the revolutionaries as such, the founding fathers and so forth, was the early rebellions against the American government that you almost never hear about, you know, like Shays Rebellion and the Whiskey Rebellion, which were essentially in character identical. I still know very little
about those.
Yeah, they're very like underreported, understudied, I guess. In character and in intent and in tone, they're much the same as the essentially like the more kind of populist and democratic side of the American Revolution. You know, the more grassroots side of it, and it's because people thought they were going to get the things that Shays and whiskey were about, but like, in fact, they didn't. They still got fucking taxes. They still got class and hierarchy, and they still got fucking butt fucked by, you know, George Washington himself and all his fucking goons, to put it bluntly.
Well,
And he went out there personally and beat the shit out of him.
A general wasn't an egalitarian
right.
ideologue?
Yeah, a fucking aristocratic general. Yeah.
The guy with the powdered wig? Are you sure?
Yeah, right. And they got thrashed. Yeah, so.
Yeah. I think it's interesting how in America, like I don't think like the surname thing is as obvious to other people. Like I think there might be an idea that the United States isn't necessarily as hasn't always been as nepotistic as other places, even though like you obviously have like a line between the Roosevelt presidents. There's obviously the Bush Kennedys. Presidencies. There's we almost had back-to-back Clinton presidencies, not even passing it down the generation, but horizontally across a marriage, which is sort of amazing. But
I mean, if you pointed out to people like, hey, why is Chelsea Clinton like in charge of all this shit? Like, why is she a representative for like a Muslim organization? And like the only answer to that is because she's Bill and Hillary's daughter.
Yep.
But nobody can figure that out somehow.
Yeah, everyone just wants to say like, yeah, sure, she's their daughter, but you know she has a lot of qualifications. She obviously they wouldn't hire her if she wasn't qualified.
Yeah, I would say we're like 2 generations away from restoring like divine right to this country. You know.
Oh no, but that's also been a large project. Is turning the aristocrats' blood blue, and I mean, even though that might have been more of a thing in Europe, where you have religion actually propping up a lot of the divine right of kings. I mean, in the United States, we didn't have priests doing it, but we've definitely sold the idea that people get to the top through hard work and gumption. The idea that like Rockefeller was rags to riches, and this one guy obviously proves that the entire system worked out. If you can become a robber baron, I mean, anyone can do it. Anyone. If Jeff Bezos could do it, you could start the next Amazon like next week with a small $100,000 loan from your parents.
Hey, I wonder if any of the Rockefellers are still rich.
Right. Go ahead.
Let's keep going. So the next thing is about Manker Olson, who we've talked about on the show before, and he basically proposed a general theory of how social classes in nations like evolve over time. So he created this concept of distributional coalitions, which includes like basically any type of organization that their aim is to get some sort of wealth for their members or constituents or what have you. So that includes businesses, labor unions, maybe even churches, stuff like that. And so basically they try to reorder society to capture more of the wealth that society generates for the people that are in it. And over time they sort of become this big ossified like web of relations with society's institutions and the other distributional coalitions, and sometimes they fracture and have to reform because of a revolution or what have you.
Yeah, and probably like one of the, especially in the United States, I mean that revolution, like violent or anything, is some, the internet occurring, or a technological revolution. A lot of the more liberal revolutions usually happen in terms of economy, so you don't think of them as revolutions, just momentary business opportunities or something.
Disrupting markets.
Yeah, disrupting markets.
Right. Innovation. Yeah.
Although it's a little sad to think of labor unions as distributional coalitions, because they've definitely been taking the L for the past couple decades.
I think this is the basic sort of, maybe I'm just building on your point sort of unnecessarily, but that's kind of, it's like collective bargaining is consciously supposed to be a distributional coalition,
Definitely.
Essentially saying this is the fucking game, so let's play the fucking game, right? We have numbers, and we can, we man the production, even if we don't have essentially institutional control, and as much like techno power.
We have power. Let's exercise it to get something for ourselves. Yeah.
Right. And so, essentially, John, what you're saying is it's pretty fucking pathetic. It's sad that like they've just been taking the L. That like they're, after Reagan, they just kind of backed off, and like we've seen some good rumblings from them, like the flight attendants union, did pretty well with the shutdown recently. That was good, but we still have to do better.
Yeah, and I mean that's also in McAlevy's to draw all the way back is labor unions have also changed in the way they've operated as well. Within McAlevy's book, she talks about like the 3 different types of like activist work you can do. You can do something like advocacy, which is like you get the experts in the room. You start wheeling and dealing in the back rooms. Make contributions to political campaigns. You could do mobilization, which is like the idea of like, all right, let's show up to this protest, or let's do like this strike just to show like what we're capable of ahead of things. But I mean, even in mobilization, that's already the people who are down. And then the last one is like the organization, the actual creation of the distributional coalition, where you get people together who can start recognizing like that they're in the game together. And then from the organizing, you can get back to the mobilizing. And of course, it makes the argument that we should do more organizing things, and we should probably move away from the advocacy model a little bit, because that's what the AFL-CIO has been doing. And since they've done that, like we've only seen a decrease overall in labor union participation. So
haven't they been agreeing to like no strike contracts a lot too, like the big unions?
Yeah,
so
that's like generally been one of their
from the table, essentially
getting hamstrung. And this is why unions like the IWW are all about wildcat strikes. Is they're just like, fuck it, like do an illegal strike. When was it legal before, right? Like we're getting. The problem is that the unions, as they exist in the public sphere and everything like that, have essentially been liberalized, right? So think of it as like dangest unionism. Like, yeah, sure, we can be capitalist and unions, and fuck you, because suddenly they're shaking hands with politicians pretty regularly, and that like they're like, let's follow the rules and be nice and play nice, and nobody gets hurt, and you're like, yeah, but everybody's hurting all the time is the thing, right? This is what you're forgetting or choosing to ignore.
Yeah, I mean, union dues aren't for political contributions. They're to maintain yourself during a strike. And that's what I feel like a lot of unions have forgotten about. Like, I mean, I feel like people just don't know that about unions. They're like, oh man, you have to pay these union dues, and I was like,
right.
if like that's cool. Like they're
well, the big propaganda like campaign by businesses has been that those union dues are for the union bosses to make money.
Right.
Because they're a business, and you can't trust business.
Right, which is hilarious because
that's an actual thing they say at Target when you get employed at Target. One of the first things they do is they show you this video, and they're like, "Unions are a business. They're only interested in money." It's like, but you guys are too.
Yeah, right. Yep. Oh yeah, the double think.
And also, I mean, you could be like you could be an effective union without fundamentally threatening the employment relation.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Like you can win more for the workers without having any desire to ever change the situation of workers being subservient to employers.
Yeah, I mean that's basically just unions in the United States.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, at least I think the IWW is explicitly.
IWW is still on some real shit if you read the Constitution and everything.
Yes. Good old. Yeah.
Okay, so the next part, I go into capitalist power, and we haven't talked about this fully on the show yet, I don't think, but in their book, Inflation as Redistribution, they draw on Mancur Olson's work, and as well as Thorstein Veblen's work, to describe inflation as a process of restructuring society to subordinate industry to business, where industry is, people actually doing stuff. They would, I think they call it production, but, we also need to include reproductive work as well. And business is essentially organizations that control the distribution of political power, wealth, and so on. And they essentially, so they restructure society to subordinate industry to themselves.
Yeah, basically like Wall Street versus Motown.
Yeah. Yes. Or the record label versus the musician, even.
Yeah.
Whereas where the musicians are industry, they're the industry workers, and the record labels are the business, managers or whatever. And so, of course, in capitalist power theory, as we've discussed many times, they find that large elite businesses are mostly formed out of mergers of smaller elite businesses, like the Kazoku of the Meiji Restoration. And the merger and acquisition process explains the distribution of corporate capital better than any other factor. So if you look at the businesses that have the highest capitalization relative to the average, they are the ones that have the most M&A activity. M&A means mergers and acquisitions, and M&A activity is like a business metric. So the ones that have the highest measure of that are the ones that do the best in the market.
I love how we make up metrics just to justify how well these businesses are doing as they completely destroy other businesses.
Yeah.
Especially as you look at like things like the corporate raiders, like things like Bain Capital.
Yeah, I love that shit. It's so interesting.
It's like the alien, like from the movie. It just like eats out your intestines. It pops out, and when it's done, it just walks around to the next victim.
Pretty much. Yep.
I mean, it's
one of those things that like we experience mergers and acquisitions all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not something that is really talked about in Marxist theory at all. I think probably wasn't that common back then.
I mean, did you get to see some shit like his favorite toy store like just get bought up, and all of a sudden all the employees at his favorite toy store just get like fired, and they get no severance pay. That they don't know where their next paycheck is coming from. They have to do new stuff, and then the toy store doesn't exist anymore. Nothing's coming to replace it. It's just gone forever, and he's no longer Mormons. A Toys R Us kid. I mean, Marx never got to feel that firsthand to put that in dust capital.
Yeah. So some of my high school friends are, they went to college around here and got jobs around here, so naturally they are defense contractors or
of course
adjacent to that.
Yeah.
So one of my friends worked for this company called Orbital, and they recently got bought out by Northrop Grumman. So now he works for Northrop Grumman, which means that my other friend who worked for Northrop Grumman before that is now his coworker. And then like at my last job, I worked for Caribou Coffee, and they got bought out by
Northrop Grumman,
J&A Bexinger Group or something. Some fucking like Dutch guys bought Caribou Coffee as well as Pete's Coffee, and then they just decided that Pete's would do better if they just homogenized everything. So all of the stores became Pete's. So I worked for Pete's Company or Pete's Coffee because our company just got bought. It got acquired by some fucking like Dutch. What you call it? Not a hedge fund. I don't know. Whatever you call that shit.
Holding company or something?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, the same stuff that happened to was it Bush? Because I mean, over in Virginia when I was growing up, you always had like Busch Gardens. You had the beer and everything. then it gets bought by like InBev, and goodbye.
So I lived right down the street from the Busch Brewery, or the Dominion Brewery, which was bought out by Busch, which was then bought out by Budweiser.
Just never ends.
Yeah. Yeah, and it sucks too because like I would go to that brewery with my dad when I was a kid. He would get beers and I would get a root beer, and then like right when I was about to turn 21, I was like, oh man, I'll finally get to get a beer at the Dominion Brewery, and then they got bought out. I was so fucking pissed. So I looked it up. It's Joe A. Benckiser. It's a German conglomerate headquartered in Luxembourg, and they own Pete's Coffee, Mighty Leaf Tea, Caribou, Einstein Brothers Bagels, Keurig Dr. Pepper, which I guess is a company now. They are a merger. They own Krispy Kreme, Panera Bread, Au Bon Pain, Paradise Bakery, Brugger's, and Pret a Manger.
So
all the same company.
What I heard is I can make Dr. Pepper now my Keurig.
I would get a Keurig if I could do that.